Have you ever wondered why you should be changing your timing belt on time and not waiting till it breaks? This is why. This is all your rockers, lifters. It's all broken. So we're gonna get this engine tore apart. We're gonna do some comparisons between the CRUA and the CJAA. Hey everyone, Josh here. So I bought the CRUA. It was on Marketplace for scrap price. The timing belt broke. And I love having scrap engines for spare parts. So I've got, well, that CRUA, I've got that CJAA that I bought that came with the DSG. I bought that just for the turbo. It was $400, couldn't pass that up. Got a BRM over there, or BEW over there. I don't know why I have it. And then back in the corner, I've got some BHWs and BRMs. Just, it's nice to have spare parts. But this CRUA was a little more disassembled than I'd hoped. There's not really a whole lot usable. But I really was curious on the top end up here, what happens when the timing belt breaks. And then this also has a belt-driven oil pump and I believe vacuum pump down on the bottom. So I'm kind of curious what that all looks like. So I'm thinking the bottom end, I'll probably have some good parts there yet. And then I was also just curious how it looks compared to the CJAA. So we're gonna go over some differences here and tear it apart. Okay, so here in North America, we had three kind of groups of common rails, I'd kind of consider them as. So we got the 09 to 14, the CBEA, and the CJAA. So these are found in Jettas, Golfs, and Beetles, and they're going to be the most common rail you're going to find. The next one would be kind of hybrid between the two here would be the CKRA, found in the Passat from 12 to 14. And then these guys found 15 only. This was the latest and greatest design TDI. And then Dieselgate happened and then no more TDIs here in North America. So there's a lot of differences on this 15 compared to the earlier common rails. So I'll kind of go over it as we take stuff apart. But the first obvious stuff is going to be like the intake, where the air to water intercooler would be bolted on here. And it's just a straight shot into the intake. Whereas this guy, you've got the intake. The CJAA had swirl flaps as well. That feeds it into there. And then the other difference is going to be the exhaust. That's all. But so you see we got 5 ports here, so that's actually 4 cylinders and then 1 for the EGR. So the CKRA is the same setup. The EGR actually flows through the head and you just got like a short little 90 that feeds it into the intake. Whereas the CJAA, it's round port, 4 ports, and then it's got like a feed tube that's over there. Actually, it's got this little feed tube that would bolt on like that and then feed it into your intake. The next big difference you're gonna find is a water pump. It's got a little sheath inside to cover up the water pump to heat the engine up quicker. We've got a belt drive oil pump down in the bottom, I believe a vacuum pump as well. Up top here, there's some pretty interesting magic going on with this, so we'll talk about that when that comes apart. That should be about it. So we're gonna start taking this stuff apart. And as you can see, the block's a lot different too. It's got the big hump right there as well as on the back side. Whereas all these older TDIs are usually pretty smooth minus like the webbing and stuff. So I'm not sure what's going on inside of there. But I guess we'll find out. So I'm not really sure what the backstory is on this car. So all this stuff is labeled 21. So it's all fairly new components. But as you can see, we got belt chunks wrapped around in here. So I'm not sure, possibly the serpentine belt jumped in there and made it jump time and chewed everything off. Or maybe that's a belt failure, that's kind of weird. But anyways, so here's our fancy new water pump. So basically that slides over, if I could hold it better. So it's kind of cool design, help get the engine up warmer quicker. But it works good until that sheath gets stuck over and blocks coolant flow. So yeah, that's one big difference on the 15. Okay, so we're gonna start off, we're gonna get this top end out of here. So we have multiple interesting things about the top end on the CRUA. So first off, both of these have dual cams, but the CJAA, it's gonna have an exhaust cam and an intake cam. So both the valves are grouped together. Whereas on the CRUA, they're actually intake, exhaust, exhaust. So they share lobes. So to see what you mean, that's a valve there, and then there's one farther back. I don't know if you can see it, but they're inline this way, whereas on the CJAA, we peer into the exhaust, we got one there, so they share that way. Next interesting thing is that it's got variable timing on the very front one at least. So that's your cam sensor, that's going to be the adjuster inside of there. So that's kind of interesting. And then the thing that both of these share actually is there's going to be gear inside of here that drives the two, just a single belt, gear. But all these lobes are pressed on, and the gear is pressed on as well. So when you have an issue such as timing failure, you're going to notice the valve or the cam lobes are all over the place. So this one's pointing up, that one's pointing ahead. These two are kind of pointing at each other. These two look like they're still in time with each other fine. So these are all over the place. So these actually shifted when they got hit and broke those. So the next thing you're gonna think is, let's just change these cams. Well, on the CRUA, this is actually an entire assembly. So I'm not sure what it exactly looks like. We're gonna get this apart and at least get this bridge out of here and see what this whole top end assembly looks like. So we've got the cam assembly unbolted, so we're gonna go over that here quick. So first off, as far as timing it, it's kind of interesting. So before, you've got a great big hub that bolts to the cam, and then the pulley itself with these 3 bolts, you just basically rotate them. That's how you set your timing. Whereas this now, the pin goes into the head there. That's how you know you're in time, and then it's this friction fit. So you loosen off this big bolt, loosen off this little bolt, and then you can move this around, and then it's friction fit. It's kind of serrated. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of like the V10s. With the V10 TDIs, the gears are held on with diamond disc washers. So same kind of thing. It's just a friction fit that holds it there. So that's kind of interesting. Next thing is going to be this variable valve timing. So I'm not gonna lie, my YouTube channel, it might make it look like I'm a Volkswagen mechanic, but I'm not a Volkswagen mechanic. I'm not an auto mechanic. I work on farm equipment, construction, and truck and coach. So variable valve timing is something new to me, so I'm not even gonna try and explain how it works. All I do know is that it changes timing slightly. But anyways, so you can see some of these, like these 2 lobes here, they look nice. The next one's over, like that is way out. These 2 here, which I'm going to be assume is another set of exhaust, they're in time. The next intake ones, again, they're way out. What one am I looking at here? These exhaust ones, they look like they're out a little bit. Oh, not too bad. Next intake, again, it's out. These 2 exhausts look nice, and these 2 intake actually look like they're where they're supposed to be. So we've got all these lobes have shifted on the cam. And then as far as this whole assembly, it's cast in there. You can see a split. You can see the split where the 2 halves came together, but that doesn't come apart. So if you look on like ID parts, this is an entire assembly. So if you have an issue with timing belt, I'm going to imagine, or I know for sure you're going to need this whole new assembly here, which isn't cheap. So now eyeing up this top end, all those valves, they seem like they're still nice and straight. We'll find out when we get this head off. But we've got the lifters, which this is a broken one, and this is a good one. So we got oil pressure, and that would push this up. And then over here we've got good rocker and bad rocker. So it looks like, this might be me guessing, but it looks like the cams and the lifters slash rockers will be the weak part here. and the valves and head might be saved. So I guess we'll find out here in a minute, but personally I think if this was my car, I would try getting a new top assembly and all of these little bits and pieces and send it. But we'll get this unbolted here now. So big triple squares. Okay, so now we got the head off. Love these head bolts. You always got cool projects you can make with these. Yeah, if you look, all the pistons. This thing was supposed to have 350,000 or so on it, so it's still got nice cross hatching. Yeah, like it inside looked nice. And then as far as the head itself, my uneducated opinion, it looks like the valves are all sitting in there still square. So it looks like you can see the outline of the piston, like the bowl right there, there. Not so much there, but it looks like the front ones took the grunt of the hit. So I'd be tempted to send that to head shop and just double check, but I think all those valves probably be still straight. Slam some new seals in it, and then you just have to replace your cam assembly. So let's dig into the bottom here. So we got an oil level sensor, and then we've got a 2-piece oil pan. So we got the steel and then cast aluminum versus just the regular cast aluminum on the older engines. So it's also a bit of a upgrade, I guess you could call it, on the Mark IVs, like the BEWs and ALHs, to put the hybrid pan with the steel bottom on. Because usually the steel, if you hit something, it's got a bit of a give, rather than the cast aluminum, just you end up poking a hole and then you end up with all your oil on the ground. But I'm gonna get this all separated and then see what we find inside. So this is what the magical oil slash vacuum pump looks like with the belt drive. Interesting setup. And then that's our 2-piece oil pan. And when people say Volkswagens are built like Legos, they're not lying. So it's actually the same bolt pattern as the oil pans, like off of like a BEW or an ALH. Looks identical. Just the difference is they've got some bolts that are accessible from the inside and some from the outside, so that's kind of interesting. Anyways, we're gonna get the front cover pulled off here and get the belt off. I'm kind of curious how that looks like. It's supposed to have 350,000 if I didn't mention, so it's a well-used engine. And then, oh, the other thing, so with these things in here, I kind of guessed it was gonna be balance shafts, because you can see these plugs here, so it looks like the balance shafts get slid in. And sure enough, you can see it hanging down there, and it's gear driven off there. Same thing over there. So Volkswagen obviously learned their lesson from the BHWs that have the balance shaft slash oil pump assemblies down there. Those are originally chain driven, and then the chain shears, and then you don't have, or the chain breaks and it takes the front cover out, and then you don't have oil pressure anymore, and then your engine's junk. So that one's actually a gear driven one. Somebody had paid to have that upgraded, but it's definitely interesting. Okay, so we get the front cover off. So nice plastic front cover, and that's what the oil pump belt looks like. So no tensioner, nothing like that. Just, I guess, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a stretch belt, but it's held on there nice and tight. So I think if you want to change it, I think we go like that. Off it comes. And that's just held on with a little square there. That's what stops it from turning. So I don't know. It's a belt. So this oil pump's got a little bit of magic going on inside of it, apparently. So that's pretty sure that controls the flow of the pump. So I'll put a link to the self-study for this CRUA engine. There's a nice section on how that pump assembly works. But anyways, As far as disassembly, I'm gonna pop the rods and pistons out next, and that's gonna be the end of it. I'm gonna leave the crank inside, and I don't imagine this block will be much good to me, but I'm kind of curious what the rods and pistons look like. Okay, so the rods and pistons are all out. So if you had to take a wild guess, which one of these 5s didn't come from this engine? That's going to be this one here. So this is out of the BHW, but it shares the same rod. The BHW and these CJAA, they use the same rods, and then the only thing different about the pistons are it's going to be the fuel bowl and the valve reliefs. So thickness this way, all measured out the same as this one, as well as the opening here. I don't have a real precise way of measuring it, but it did seem very similar. But the bearings are all different part numbers, so I'm not sure the compatibility. But the BHW/CJAA rods are about the strongest rods you can get in stock form, so might be a budget upgrade for some of the older TDIs. So I just thought I'd do a quick comparison here yet too. So that's the common rail BHW rod setup. And here's my cracked piston out of an ALH. Look at the difference in rods. Looks like it's out of a weed whacker compared to the common rails. Okay, so final thoughts on this engine. So the water pump, that sheath, a little scary, but I know you can update it where it's just the regular water pump, nothing special. The belt, well, obviously lasted 350,000 kilometers so far, and pump's still pumping, so I don't know what to think about that. The issue I have is with the head and the cams. So most TDIs, the failure is going to be a broken timing belt. So obviously that's a 1 year only piece. So good luck finding used and new. I think it's about 800 US. This head, if you end up having valve issues or head issues, again, this is a 1 year only. It's got the oval port, so you might think, hey, let's throw on a CKRA. At least that opens up 3 more years. But they have the traditional CJAA style intake. And the other issue too is the same thing with the cams. They have the same style cams, or I think they have the same cams as the CJAA. And then it comes into your, yeah, it's just not easy. The block itself, same kind of deal. All the connections and stuff, it's different than what they normally use with their traditional block, having the balance shaft stuff up in here. Oil pan, I can like that. The steel bottom's kind of nice, but kind of is what it is. So you can't fit the regular aluminum bottom one on because of the oil pump / vacuum pump. So I think if Volkswagen didn't get caught with the Dieselgate and there was more of these engines around, I think it would work out pretty good. I think their emissions systems are a lot better, but we've only got 1 year, so it's from a serviceability standpoint, these engines seem like it might be a bit of a nightmare in 5-10 years. So anyways, that's the end of that. So I'm going to keep the parts I want to keep, throw out the rest, and on to the next project.